All right, everybody, let's get started. Got some people here in the office that are watching as well. If they can just tell me if the audio is okay. Audio's good. All right. All right, so let's get started. Thanks everybody for coming. We're going to do a talk today on cybersecurity recommendations for working from home. We're going to use the NIST guidance, and if some of you haven't heard, NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. NIST is very often a resource that is used in order to establish or utilize standard guidelines. So these are adopted, tested, vetted guidelines, and we often use them for various things. Things like, there's these teleworking guidelines. There's guidelines for auditing. There's guidelines for encryption. So it's just used as a standard, and they have recently come out with some newer guidance on just developing better standards for secure mobile or telework access. So we're just going to go through those types of things. So just a little bit of an introduction of who we are. As soon as I can get into the right spot. We are Secure Cyber Defense. My name is Sean Walbin. I am the CEO. We are a managed cybersecurity company based out of Dayton, Ohio. We do a lot of work in the NIST space, specifically with DoD contracts and helping organizations become compliant with those standards. We also service the financial, manufacturing, aerospace, and SLED markets. So we have clients all over the U.S. and Canada, actually. And we provide, not only do we provide managed cybersecurity services, but we also provide other services as well. So consulting services for security. We are not an IT company, so nothing that we do is IT related. We are not an MSP. So everything that we do is cybersecurity. Consulting, managed security. We do incident response as well, so boots on the ground incident response. So we pride ourselves by being able to respond to incidents, breach type incidents, and actually process the scene. We have a team of forensic investigators and even ex-federal agents that work for us in order to provide those services. We are 24/7. We don't offshore anything at all. Everything is based here in the United States. All of our assets and servers are here in the U.S. So that's just kind of a little bit of a background of who we are. Now, as far as connecting with us on social media, this has been kind of a newer effort for us. So our company page out on Twitter is probably the best place for real-time type information. SecDef LLC, I know we were tweeting out some information yesterday. There was a global, not a global, but a nationwide internet outage that affected a lot of our clients. Cyber Walbin is my personal one. So if you're looking for some personal insights on cyber and just kind of my thoughts there, that's a place to go. I do speak publicly quite a bit. So as we open things up and start moving about the country again, I'll be posting information on where I am and what I'm talking about on that Twitter handle. LinkedIn, you can reach out to us on LinkedIn and see some information and follow our page for some more cyber-related following and information. We have a new YouTube site that's on. If you just search for Secure Cyber Defense LLC, you'll find our YouTube page where we will be posting webinars like these publicly, as well as we're lining up some special webinars coming up here in May that will involve things like cyber insurance, legal, get some attorneys on and start talking to them about cyber and that type of thing. And then on Facebook, we actually have the Go Cyber Center, which is our executive training center. That's a training center that's designed to feed education information for CEOs and C-level executives, kind of plain English cybersecurity. I call it the cybersecurity petting zoo, where we can actually just sit down and have discussions about cyber and the importance of it, as well as actually see some of that equipment and actually see, what is a firewall? What does that look like? So we can go through those types of things. So follow that page for some information about that. All right, so let's just kind of get into the content a little bit. And so let's talk about just a telework definition. So teleworking is the ability for a company to perform work from locations other than the organization's facilities. Now that seems pretty straightforward, right? Most organizations have sent employees home, to their homes to work. We sent them home with all kinds of devices. Could be Chrome. I've heard Chromebooks, and I've heard stories of people just walking in and taking their desktops and monitors and taking them home. So there's been all kinds of activity around that area. And what's happened? Well, we've taken all of these secure devices inside a secure perimeter and we've deployed them, right? So if you've got 300 employees that you've sent home, you now have 300 branch offices. That's probably a really good way of looking at that. Whether you like that analogy, probably not. So teleworkers use various client devices to conduct business-related tasks. Most teleworkers are using remote access, or the ability for an organization's users to access non-public computing resources from off-site locations. We're going to go through kind of what some of those methods are as we go through this. And then when we get to the NIST content, NIST is providing guidance on teleworking and remote access. So it aims to help the organization mitigate security risks and associated risk while teleworking. Some of the stuff that we'll talk about when we actually get to the recommendations from NIST, things like developing a workforce policy, tiered levels of access for remote access, multi-factor authentication, validation of encryption technologies. NIST is very big on encryption, and as should everyone be, right? Encryption and multi-factor access are 2FA, MFA, however you want to say it, are probably two of the most important things. Heck, we've even learned from all the Zoom stuff of how important it is to just put a password on a Zoom meeting. So ensuring remote access servers are secured and fully patched, and then securing the teleworking clients against common threats. We're going to talk about all that as we go through that. We'll basically do, this will probably last about 30 minutes, maybe less, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. If you have questions as we go through this, if you want to just pop them into the Q&A, and then I'll be able to take a look at those as we go through here and answer any questions that you might have. All right, so what are some of the remote access methods? How is this done? Well, basically there's 4 categories. So we've got tunneling portals, not tunneling portals, but tunneling, portals, direct application access, and remote desktop access. So we'll kind of talk about what each of those processes are. So tunneling. This is probably one of the most important things, or I'm sorry, one of the most common ways of accessing, and this is going to be used via a VPN client. So what you're seeing here is a screenshot of the FortiClient console, which is the FortiClient VPN software. This is where you send home a remote worker. They have a VPN client. Maybe it's Fortinet, maybe it's Cisco, or you know, Cisco Anywhere. I think, is it Anywhere? So whatever the VPN client is for Cisco. You type in a username and password. IT department sets it up. And then you connect in, and then boom, you've got access to all of your internal resources. So that is client to device communication. It's involving cryptography, so there's encryption that's enabled. So this client is basically talking to a VPN gateway. It could be a firewall. Sorry about that. So this is the FortiClient console that you're seeing here on the right. So client to device communication. So the client is communicating with a firewall or a VPN gateway. We're using cryptography or encryption to maintain the confidentiality and the integrity of the communication. The client device software applications can communicate securely through the tunnel. So once the client gets connected to the VPN, then you can access things like an intranet or internal applications that you would use. The tunnel uses some type of authentication method. So here in this example that you're seeing on the screen, you're seeing a username and password. What would happen after this for all of our clients that are using VPN portals with Fortinet technology is you would have a multi-factor code that would be also being asked for. So username, password, and then your multi-factor code. If you're in an organization that is not using that type of technology, I would highly encourage you to encourage your IT department to at least integrate multi-factor. So most common VPN technology or protocols are what's called IPsec and SSL. So those are the tunneling protocols that are most commonly used, and any IT department is using usually one of those two protocols. So hopefully I can learn how to advance my screen without killing off the screen sharing. All right, so next thing up here is portals. So login is done through a web interface most generally. What we are showing here is something that that might be used. In this case, we're showing VMware Horizon View, which is a portal-based remote access technology. Again, we're showing username and password as well as multi-factor authentication should be enabled on your portal type system. So the portal is a server that offers access to one or more applications through a centralized interface, which you're seeing here. The teleworker uses a protocol client on the device. So on their laptop at home, they've got some VMware Horizon protocol client that's kind of brokering the connection between the two. This is most generally web-based, which you're seeing here. The portal protects the communication between the client device and the portal. And then the portal can authenticate users and restrict access to the organization's internal resources. Most portal architecture, like you're seeing here, would use SSL VPN access in order to accommodate that. The next one is direct application access. So this is probably the most common way of showing you direct application access is this is a Amazon login. So this is an application that's exposed directly to the internet. Everyone knows you can go to Amazon.com and type in your username and password, and of course your multi-factor authentication, especially for Amazon. You can set that up for free, by the way, inside your account. This is just a perfect example of direct access. So the remote access is accomplished without any software. So other than the Chrome browser or Firefox or whatever your favorite browser is, Netscape Navigator, you can utilize a browser to just access the application and log in. So the benefit of this is the teleworker can access an individual application directly. They don't need any software. The application itself provides its own security. So inside the application is all the encryption is enabled. You've got a secure certificate on the server as well to secure its identity. And like I said, this is the most common example. Webmail would be another example. So if you're using maybe Office 365 and you're heading out to home and you want to check your email remotely, or you go to the in-laws house or something, I think you guys get the point of direct access and what that means. So the next way of accessing is, and probably one of the most common ones, is remote desktop. It's also probably one of the more riskier ones. So this is done in a couple different ways. So typically what we've seen organizations do, which we don't condone, is exposing is the word I was looking for, is exposing a remote desktop server to the internet directly. That should never be done. If it has to be done, there are some very, very strict standards where you would have to do that. What we would prefer is, and what NIST would prefer, is that you put the servers behind the first tunneling or portal area. So if we go back here, tunneling or portal would give you access to the remote desktop server. At that point, this gives the teleworker the ability to remote control a computer at the organization. It's most generally theirs, like their desktop. Or this could be a server or some type of application server inside the environment. On the right-hand side, you're seeing the domain and password boxes. We would highly recommend initiating multi-factor authentication as well in order to further authenticate the user. But this is one of the most popular methods. The teleworker has input control over the remote computer. And again, this type of remote desktop access should only be put behind a VPN or inside a portal in order to provide secure access. Please don't expose remote desktop servers to the internet. That is just one of the primary ways that hackers are getting access to environments. One of the most common ways that ransomware is spread is via remote desktop servers that are exposed. All right, so what are some of the security concerns? So when we look at the security concerns, telework and remote access technologies need additional protection. The nature of these technologies put them at higher exposure to external threats and compared to internal technologies only accessible within the organization. So some major concerns that we have are lack of physical security controls. So obviously we've taken a worker inside a building and we've sent them home. So the issue is that the device is now located outside of the physical walls of the organization. So an issue based on client devices using a variety of locations outside of an organization's control. The mobile device is outside. It could be stolen. It could be lost. We could be placing the device's data at risk of compromise. So that's a security concern, right? Just the pure fact that it leaves the physical confines of the building. Unsecured networks. So organizations normally have no control over the security of external networks used by telework clients, meaning that at my house, if I send, when I go home, my organization, well, I'm a bad example because I have a Fortinet, actually I have a Fortinet firewall at my house. Your normal teleworker that goes home, the IT department doesn't have any control over that environment, right? So if you go home, you've got a router, most likely a consumer router. You've got devices on the network at the same time as the corporate device. Any of those devices could be compromised. They could be your kids' devices, tablets. They could be IoT devices like your washer and dryer or refrigerator. So we have no control over that environment. So that becomes a problem if that particular environment isn't secured properly. And then providing external access to internal only resources. So this is a threat exposure to sensitive servers, and it increases the likelihood that they will be compromised. So each form of remote access used for an internal resource increases the risk of that resource being compromised. There's a question that came in for individuals working from home who don't have a full like corporate firewall, like a Fortinet firewall. Should they utilize a VPN? And if so, what product would you recommend? You know, I mean, yes, they should use a VPN. You know, I know NordVPN is probably one of the most popular ones that's out there, and it's recommended a lot. I don't necessarily have one specifically that we recommend, but I'd say NordVPN would probably be, you know, do your own research. You know, do some homework on secure VPN solutions for home, and you know, make a decision based on that. But yes, I would recommend, especially if that remote worker, I know we can't go to restaurants, so that's a bad example, but when we are allowed to do that again, if you go to like a Panera or you know, some type of public Wi-Fi, you should definitely use a VPN. And for a corporate resource, by the way, if the VPN is set up correctly, I don't want to go into a lot of technical details here, but there's something called split tunneling. And if split tunneling is disabled, then my corporate VPN that I would use would protect me, because if I went to Starbucks and I used my corporate VPN and split tunneling was off, then all of my internet traffic is going to be routed through my VPN client and out my company's firewall. So I'll be protected there. So that counts. So I think the question is basically around consumers or individuals that aren't using corporate resources a VPN, yes, is recommended. That's a good question. So what are some of the NIST recommendations? So all components of telework and remote access solutions should be secured against expected threats. I guess that's kind of a given, right? NIST recommends organizations apply some of these safeguards that we're going to talk about to improve security of their telework and remote access technologies. So one of the ones is, plan telework-related security policies and controls based on the assumption that external environments contain hostile threats. And that's what we talked about before, is that once a teleworker goes home, you lose the ability to control that environment. So we have to just assume that that device is going to be attacked and is under attack, and make sure that we're deploying the security policies accordingly. So an organization should assume that all external facilities, networks, devices contain hostile threats, and they're attempting to gain access to the organization's data and resources. An organization should also assume that malicious parties will gain control of telework client devices and attempt to recover sensitive information. These are all just assumptions that you should be making, based on your designing a security protocol. So they could also leverage the device to gain access to the enterprise's network. All right, so what are some of the mitigating options? What can I do as an IT person to protect my teleworkers' devices? So one of the first things you should do is definitely encrypt the device's storage and sensitive data. Now, some of these options are going to be difficult because the devices have already left. So unless you have some type of technology that's going to allow you to do some of these things remotely, these are definitely things that once we come back, that we should be deploying, kind of rethinking our teleworking process. So encrypting drives is definitely at the top of the list. So not storing sensitive data on client devices. So this is, the ability to use something like a group policy control or some type of administrative control to stop a user from saving data locally. This is a hot topic generally when we're talking to other IT departments. I think IT people in general are okay with that, and they're for that. Definitely, I don't want my users putting anything local. If they do, then there's just got to be something in the policy that states that, should the IT department need to, wipe the device, that, our policy is for you to not keep anything on the client device, on the local device, and it could be lost at any time and we're not responsible. It could be that type of wording. So using strong authentication, we advocate for multi-factor authentication, even on domains. I know we've got some aerospace and manufacturing customers on this call that have to conform with NIST compliance. Multi-factor authentication is definitely advocated in that case. Obviously, it's required for compliance reasons, but you should be deploying multi-factor authentication to a domain login. And then using encryption technologies and encryption technologies to protect communications. Most of that is handled by the method of which that you would choose to allow the remote worker to access those resources. So if it's over, the protocol, the VPN client, the portal, you're getting the appropriate encryption technology from those types of communications. And then authenticate endpoints to verify their identities. We'll talk just a little bit later here in some of the recommendations about NAC. And that's kind of what this is referring to. So another important assumption is that a Telework client device will become infected with malware. That's just something that we have to accept. So as far as mitigating options for that, just making sure that you're using anti-malware technologies. I know that sounds like a given, but one thing that we see a lot of is we see people like do the right things, right? They go out and get a commercial version or an enterprise version of anti-malware antivirus technology. However, it's not configured correctly. So it's the same thing with firewalls, right? It's very easy to run out and get a firewall and hook it up, but we have seen many, many times and have actually done responses where we've walked into an organization with an enterprise corporate firewall that has no security features enabled. And so you just have to make sure that you're securing these devices. Many of them, so if you're, Symantec, Trend, many of the anti-malware companies have, if you'll just Google best practice documents, they have best practice documents that have recommendations in order to secure that technology. And they'll have step-by-step instructions on all the boxes that you should have checked and all those things that you should be doing. So seek out that type of document, or just call the manufacturer and open a ticket and say, hey, I want some help in just making sure that I've got my solution set up correctly. Do you have a document that I can read? Seek out that type of information. Use network access control solutions. So that's verifying the client security posture before granting access. That's network access control. So what that means is a teleworker goes home and they utilize that VPN client to log in with their username and password and their multi-factor. And then what would normally happen is they would just be given direct access right into the corporate environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert NAC, and we're going to insert a step. And right after they authenticate, NAC is going to take over and say, okay, hold on just a second. You've got the right username and password and token code. That's fantastic. But I want to look at your device first. I want to see, do you have antivirus? Is it up to date? Have you ran a scan recently? Are your patches installed? So NAC is going to put an additional control set in place, and it's going to start looking at your end device that's trying to get in, and it's going to make sure that it conforms to your network access control policy. So that's one way, an additional way that we can make sure that a device is secure before it comes in. So remember, in previous slides, we talked about assuming that the end environment that this teleworker is in, their home, is compromised or there's some type of issue. So that's how we're going to work that out when that device is coming in. We're going to make sure that they've done a recent virus scan, and if there was something, that antivirus took care of it. If there is a outstanding security related issue, that gets resolved before they get access into the network. And then we're going to talk about, or the NIST guidance talks about separating the network devices at the organization's facilities for teleworkers. So basically what that means is when your workers start coming back and they've got these devices with them, what is your process to reintroduce that device back into the environment? So setting up maybe a staging network or some type of network where it's not connected to production, and you're going to run scans and check devices out to make sure that they meet compliance before they're reintroduced back into the corporate environment. That might be a step that's getting missed and shouldn't be missed, especially when we start bringing devices back. So the next NIST recommendation section is the boring part that nobody wants to do, and that's the Teleworker Policy. So again, I understand that devices have already left and they're out. So this is probably just more of a when things get back to normal and we start getting back to business and people come back, making sure that we have a telework policy, and the security policy should define forms of remote access, what's permitted, the types of devices, and that type of stuff. It should also cover the organization's remote access servers, so how they're administered and how policies are updated. The organization is going to have to make some risk-based decisions about the devices that they expose and what additional risk that's going to bring. So if you decide to expose a server or an application to the internet that wasn't there before, that introduces risk, and that has to be addressed. So you may go through some tiered levels of remote access, right? So most controlled devices have the most access, and least controlled devices have minimal access. Always operate on the least privilege, right? So always give a user or device the minimum access required in order to accomplish the task. Next is securing remote access servers. So obviously, we need to make sure that devices are fully patched. Again, this seems like a no-brainer, and I shouldn't even be covering this, but even today, we still have organizations that we've run across that say that they do patches every 6 months or once a quarter. You've got to do patches every month. I understand that there are going to be situations of devices that can't be patched every month. You have to adjust your policy accordingly in order to accommodate those types of situations. I know I'm painting with a broad brush, but I'm just here to tell you and advocate from a cybersecurity professional. And what we've seen out in the field is these devices that are exposed have got to be fully patched. Talk to Expedient, right? Or not Expedient, but the company that had the big breach. I can't remember, but that was a application or device that was exposed that had vulnerabilities, that had missing patches. And if somebody remembers it, please please put it in the comments because it's going to bother me. That was a big breach, and that was just basically due to a patch that wasn't addressed, and that was an external faced device. Enable trusted hosts. So if you're able to do it, basically what that means is if you have to expose a device, Equifax, yes, thank you. If you have to expose a device, make sure that you've enabled something like trusted hosts. And what trusted host does is it says, and by the way, trusted host could also be a firewall rule. So it says this device is exposed, but it can only be accessed by these IP addresses. So that's trusted hosts. Or it can only be administered from these IP addresses. So just make sure that you have things like that deployed. And then you're going to have to evaluate where on the network you've exposed this. So we see a lot of organizations have their servers on the network, and they're on they're on this area of the network, and it's a separate network. But then they take one of the servers and expose it directly to the internet. Well, that's not how you do that. So you would take that server and you would put it in something called like a DMZ, a demilitarized zone. So you would put that publicly accessible device into a DMZ, and then that would provide an additional barrier between the attacker and the inside network, or the person accessing the server and the outside network. So just make sure that location on the network is taken into consideration. And then securing telework devices, secure organization-controlled telework devices against common threats and maintain their security regularly. So there are many threats to telework devices: malware, device loss or theft, social engineering. It could even be unintentional damage where maybe the kids knocked the laptop off and destroyed it, that type of thing. I'm sure that's happened. But these are all threats to be aware of in teleworking environments. So introducing anti-malware, making sure that you've got a good inventory of those devices that have left, and you're addressing what you would do if a user called you and said, I've lost my device or it was stolen. So obviously that's where encryption and technologies come into play that help you locate those types of devices. Certainly users are going to be social engineered. The amount of phishing threats that are going on right now and phishing campaigns is just off the scale. I've spoken on that on a regular basis on our regular weekly briefings that we put out. If I took all those and gave everybody all the information about that, I could probably run a TV show 7 days a week and just call it phishing threats and just talk about that. So it's a lot. So from the social engineering aspect, just make sure that your users are educated and that you're using some type of education platform to get your users the appropriate social engineering training and phishing testing to make sure that the users are paying attention. Securing telework devices more, so applying all the OS and application updates. That includes third-party updates. So things like Google and Firefox, and our Intel team put out a briefing just the other day about Foxit PDF Reader, which is very common because Foxit is used as a more economical equivalent or replacement for Adobe products. So it's very heavily used. But it's got a vulnerability, and you need to be on top of that and be able to apply those, have a method of applying those updates. One of our favorite platforms, if you're an IT department out there and you're like, well, I don't have a way of deploying third-party updates. Ninite is a great platform, and I believe there's a free version of it that will put the packages together for you, and then you can deploy them via group policy or however you deploy patches. But Ninite is a great platform. Disabling unneeded services. When we talk about securing OSs, that's one of the things that's on the list. One of our other favorite organizations is the Center for Internet Security, or CIS. CIS has the ability for you to, I think it's subscription based, but it's not very much, to go out and download secure versions of operating systems that already have all the services turned off that are not necessary, and those types of things. So disabling all the unneeded services, using anti-malware, turning on the personal firewall. So especially if we're going to send a device out into the field or to home, we want to be able to utilize the Windows firewall. The Windows firewall is actually pretty good, if my honest opinion. So you might want to take advantage of using that since it's built in. And then Telework devices should also include additional security controls like encryption. So you may not have to encrypt every device that leaves. So maybe based on the user's role or what they do, you might decide who needs to be encrypted and who doesn't. But we definitely advocate for local encryption, certainly. And we're going to the last slide here, and then we can open it up for some questions. So if you've got questions right now, I don't really see any. Now's the time to put them in there so that I can answer them when I'm finished here. But in conclusion, making an organization's resources remotely accessible enables teleworking at the expense of increasing security risk. We all know that happened. This presentation addresses what some of those concerns were and how to mitigate them. So certainly when users come back and if they need to be redeployed, we should be able to deploy in a more secure manner and kind of reorganize, what that process is going to be and how that's going to work. So organizations should consider the balance between the benefits of providing remote access to additional resources against the potential impact of those resources being compromised. And then to mitigate risk, organizations should ensure that internal resources available through remote access are hardened. We talked about, ways of hardening those devices, making sure that they're patched, enabling encryption. So hardening those devices against external threats and access to resources is limited to the minimum necessary. We talked about NAC, and there's a lot of NAC solutions out there. I would probably, if there were two or three things that I'd say to hone into here, is the addition of NAC would be very big for helping secure organizations and verifying that device is healthy before it gets on. So NAC, multi-factor authentication, that's probably one of the hardest ones to do. But being able to do multi-factor authentication against a device that comes in over VPN, and then also providing another layer of multi-factor to access the application would be great. Security doesn't equal convenience, right? Not all of us know that. So all these additional controls are going to add, more complexity, and unfortunately, sometimes it can delay getting access. But we all know it's for the good of the order. And then the third thing, that I would hone into is definitely a patch strategy. So making sure that you actually have a patch strategy and a way to measure it. So I've done patching for a long time, both at previous organizations and then, doing it as a service for organizations. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I've learned the most is check and verify. So being able to have the ability to deploy a patch and then following up to make sure that patch got deployed. So running a scan of your network if it's Zoom, for example, I want to deploy the latest version of Zoom, and I want to make sure all my users have done that. Take a baseline of what it looks like now before you notify them, and then being able to have the ability to take that same inventory after you've given that message out. So you've got to have a way to measure the effectiveness of what you're doing to make sure that your that your protocols are being followed through and that they're effective. It's 11:41. That's all I have. There are no questions in there. So if somebody is just typing and finishing up some questions, now is a good time to ask those. We've got, about 4 minutes. I wanted to end it at 11:45. If for some reason you have a question later on, or you'd like to follow up with me, you can send us an email at info@secdef.com. That our website is there as well as our phone number. So if there's some way that we can help you, if you're already a customer, you know what our capabilities are. But if there's some non-customers on here, or ways that we can help you or answer questions, that's our phone number. And again, you can send us an email to info@secdef.com, and we'd be happy to provide you any additional information that you might need. This presentation is being recorded, and we are going to post it to our YouTube page because this was made publicly accessible. So please hop out to our YouTube channel, subscribe, and then click the bell. And then the bell will notify you whenever we post future webinars or future videos. And then please try and head out to those social media platforms and hook up with us there so that you can stay up to date on all the current cyber risks and any additional ones that pop up. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for joining me at lunchtime. I'm going to go have lunch now. So have a great day, and then have a great rest of the week. Thanks.